Welcome. This is the Lawyers Hub in association with the Bandung Conference Kenya, supported by Kenya Diaspora Alliance and featuring the Kenya Historical Injustice Campaign. I'm delighted to have an international array of panelists to discuss the historical injustice in Kenya, the Sotik massacre, the assassination of Koitalel, a tribal leader who was killed by the British in 1905. We have a panel which will look at not only historical injustices, but the present exploitation by tea multinationals, particularly in Kericho and Bomet County. We will look at the legal remedies that are being pursued, and for that we have two lawyers with us. We have Kimatai Massacre, who is to my left.
Yes.
We have, for an overview and, in a sense, the driver behind the whole campaign, His Excellency, the Governor of Kericho, Mr. Paul Chepkwony, to my right. And in London, I'm honoured to have my old friend, Ms. Claudia Webb, one of the newest minority members, African Caribbean members of Parliament. So thank you very much for joining us here to give the view from the diaspora. We also have in Nairobi a noted Kenyan historian, Mr. Godfrey Sang, who will tell a synopsis of the historical injustice and their impact today. And last but not least on this panel, we have Dr. Kony Sozi, who's not only a lawyer in the United Solicitor in the United Kingdom and human rights expert, but also has done a doctorate on Kenyan land rights, which is her country of birth. So may I give you all a very warm welcome, and you will also be joined sometime later by the second panel to develop the issues further. Can I first therefore start by having one of four presentations and call upon His Excellency Paul Chepkwony, the Governor of Kericho County, just to give his perspective on the historical abuses and the current situation.
Thank you very much, Judge Peter. Before I make my short presentation, I would like to congratulate Honorable Claudia for her election. And by the way, thank you for your strength. I follow your contributions in Parliament, and I'm your fan. Continue fighting for the rights of the weak and the meek. When I was growing up, there is something I didn't understand until I became governor of Kericho. We were landless, and I didn't understand why in Kenya, after independence, we were the only community that was landless. But one time, my grandmother told me to go to school so I may sue the British. I didn't understand at that time exactly what she meant, because that was when I was only 10 years old. But when I became governor, and the first governor of Kericho, upon promulgation of the new constitution 2010, this constitution opened up a possibility of seeking justice for the people in suffering. So what happened is a group of my community members, the Kipsigis at the Talai, brought a petition to my office. At that time, we were a government of Kericho County. The petition had quite a number of demands to the British government. And as is required, it was supposed to go to the Assembly and to be presented as a motion to the County Assembly, which was supposed to compel me to take action by appointing lawyers who would pursue the case to final conclusion. And this petition had very, very interesting demands, which I am very proud to go through some of them very quickly. One of them is illegal alienation of 150,000 acres of land from the Kipsigis and Talai, burning of houses and sacred places of worship, confiscation of animals and economic sabotage, which caused recession in the early 1900s. And then the important one is the Sotik massacre, where apparently because of the people's resistance, the British Army lined up 1,850 people and fired them with one machine gun, one Maxim machine gun, killing 1,850 people. So people of Kericho, the Kipsigis and Talai, are demanding justice and compensation and apology from the British government. But the most inhumane treatment was after annexation of land, which was illegal. People were confined into apartheid Bantustan-like overcrowded settlements in a park which they put aside and nicknamed Lumbwa, which means in Kiswahili, Lumbwa is Mbwa, which means dog. And this is where people are living in squalid conditions like dogs without an apology. This is very, very serious. So as a county government, we took action, and apparently we appointed our Queen's Counsel to lead the case, and that is Rodney Dixon, assisted by Joel Koseku Izia. And the first step they took was to reach out to the Commonwealth Foreign Office. Apparently, they took it for granted. Ultimately, we decided to file the complaint at the Human Rights UN Special Rapporteur. So the complaint is before the Human Rights Special Rapporteur, and we hope we'll get a reply soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. We'll come back for more details about the campaign in due course. Can I now go to the United Kingdom? And I know Right Honourable Claudia Webb has done extensive work on not only on the rights of Africans in the diaspora, but also looking to historical injustices. And I think if I'm right, in your maiden speech in the House of Commons, you specifically made a mention of Kenya and the historical injustices. So from your perspective and knowledge, what's your view of what can be done by the diaspora, and particularly in parliamentarians like yourself?
Well, of course, it's a pleasure to join, obviously, such an esteemed panel of speakers for today's important event. And I think that if we are to end the scourge of institutional racism, the destructive legacy of colonialism, international discussions such as these are absolutely crucial, because the British history of the British Empire casts a long and enduring shadow on present day global dynamics, because we cannot talk about the present without former empires engaging in a process of recognition and apologies, returning what was stolen and reparations for past atrocities, of course. The extractive, violent interference of the British Empire began, of course, in Kenya, began at the end of the 19th century until Kenyan independence of 1964. And as a British citizen, I find it dishonest, disrespectful, when present-day High Commissioners attempt to whitewash, if you like, the cruel history of the British Empire in Kenya. And across the world, instances of appalling murder and violence at the hands of the British state have been erased from our present-day memory of empire. Nowhere is this clearer than the massacre of the Sotik people in Kenya, where 1,800 Sotik men, women, and children were murdered in colonial grab raid. And of course, we've seen very clearly across Kenya and other regions forced to really endure the injustice of colonialism. Indigenous communities were systematically alienated from their rightful lands. This historical injustice laid the groundwork for decades of uneven development and corporate extraction, as we see in the persistent damage caused by global tea plantations in Kenya's beautiful Bomet and Kirishi counties. The findings, of course, of the Kenyan National Land Commission in 2018 is also obviously very important in demonstrating the enduring human rights violations of the Kipisi and Talai people. This is just one of many examples of the enduring destructive legacy of Western colonialism. The time has come for former empires actually to apologize and actually take seriously the historical debt that they owe to countries across the world, and communities, of course, and individuals who endured their cruelty. And so, as a British member of Parliament, of course, I believe that we must consider the impact of Britain's colonial legacy on modern day global insecurity and be ambitious about changing the unjust dynamics of global debt. We have an organization called the Jubilee Debt Campaign, which has said that it is vital to mount a financial pressure, vital to alleviate the mounting financial pressure on less well-off countries. And by cancelling, in effect, the debt payments, because that is absolutely important, cancelling them this year. This was after the organization found that more than 60 countries are spending more on paying their creditors than they are on helping their populations in terms of health. And among the 121 income countries for which 2019 data was available, they found on average 10.7% of government revenue spending was actually going to service debt, as against a situation of 12.2% on external. So 10.7% of government revenue was spending on health, compared to a spend of 12.2% on global debt payments. And that's really quite a disgrace. And many African countries, therefore, commonly pay more than 10% interest on their borrowings, while richer nations are paying just 1% or less. So in Kenya's case, the country currently owes 60% of its GDP in central government debt. And that's according to, of course, the IMF. This is obviously quite unacceptable, and is a direct consequence of the uneven power dynamics that exist. And of course, we all have a responsibility to try to address that uneven dynamic as it presents itself. And this uneven power dynamics forged through centuries of violent extractive colonialism and imperialism must be seen for what it is. As official imperialism ended in the second half of the 20th century, Western powers ensured the continued subjugation of former colonies with a program of enforced informal imperialism, which is the global debt system. And that, in a sense, has to be exposed for what it is. And the more that countries like the UK play its part in addressing the exposure of what is necessary, and this, of course, is administered through the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and they play a central part. And as Thomas Sankara, the assassinated radical president of Burkina Faso, eloquently put it, debt origins come from colonialism's origin, and therefore those who lend us money are those who, in effect, had colonized us before. So, under its current system, under its current form of debt, is a cleverly managed reconquest of Africa, aiming to subjugate aiming to continue subjugation, and aiming to continue the subjugation in terms of its growth and development. And so that's what we have to understand when we talk about what can we do. It's through that subjugation of its growth and development through foreign rules that we have to address it. Britain and other Western countries have a moral duty to ensure that economically poorer countries do not disproportionately suffer from coronavirus due to the unjust hindrance of global debt. Now is the time for Britain to seriously consider calling for an end to this historical injustice. For this and other reasons, I was proud to join 300 lawmakers from across the political and global financial organizations to fully call for a cancellation of in a sense, poorer nations' debts, because it's so important that we understand this dynamic and what it means, because the need to cancel debt and the work that is necessary to combat the coronavirus is so important. And so efforts, I think, such as these are necessary because in a sense, if we're going to do something about that, efforts such as these do not go nearly as far enough to make up for centuries of cruel imperialism, yet they form part of the holistic engagement that is required for Kenyans, Africans, and other victims of colonialism the world over. And it's necessary to receive, to tackle injustice and indeed to receive justice for what has been long overdue. And I would like to end by saying that whilst we are in the minority, oppressed peoples around the world do have allies in the UK who recognise the historical injustice perpetrated by the British Empire. And whilst we have much to do with keeping and working with movements of justice across the world, what I would want to say is that we will, of course, continue to work in solidarity with all of those, all who are working to tackle these injustices. And we will keep working with movements for justice across the world. And it's important that we all do this, that we seek to work with justice and movements across the world to dismantle the perverse systems of institutional imperialism and racism and neo-imperialism. Together, finally, we can finally, if we work in this way, we can work together, and we can finally take the knee off oppression off our necks. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And you can see and hear just how eloquently and strong we have a real resource in Parliament, in the diaspora. So I want to take this forward. We'll pick up these points again when we return to the international efforts that we can make, both with the governor here and, in a sense, the legal remedies we'll hear about shortly. Before I do that, however, can I get a summary and synopsis of exactly what one of the main triggers, not the only one, but one of the main triggers of historical injustice was, which I was horrified to hear about, and I read a very brilliant article by Godfrey Sang. Godfrey, can I ask you to give that summary for us, please? But I think you have to unmute.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Judge Peter. Thank you very much, Honorable Claudia, Honorable Your Excellency, Governor of Kericho County, and all the panelists that are here. Well, it was one of those things that happened at the start of the colonial enterprise. Kenya was just about 10 years into its colonial rule, but there was still a lot of fires to be put out here and there. Now, many communities in Kenya openly welcomed the British, but a number chose to resist them. And one of those that chose to resist them was the Kalenjin, the people who are known today as the Kipsigis, and the Nandi, who were collectively known then as the Nandi people. But then the first point of resistance was just about the time when they had just signed a treaty. I will call it treaty in quotes because one party understood what it meant, the other party did not understand what it meant. And this happened on the 13th of October, 1889, when they met at Sotik. Now, Sotik was the place where a major battleground would be a battleground point about 16 years after the signing of the Anglo-Kipsigis Treaty in 1889. So in 1905 March, as they usually did, the Kipsigis around the Sotik area made a raid against the against the Maasai, made off with about 200 cattle. But then this time, okay, the practice was that the Maasai would actually come back sometime and make a counter raid following their cattle. But then the Maasai had found a new ally in the British. And so they had just signed what was known as the Maasai Agreement in 1904, just shortly, not so long after that. And so they turned to them and said, yes, you signed a piece of paper with us. You said you would protect us. The Kipsigis have gone with our cattle. So the British were keen to give the Maasai a reason to smile for having signed a lopsided agreement with them in 1904. And so they made for Sotik. And the process was that 2 Maxim guns were used against defenseless people, and over 1,850 people were killed on just that one single day. Actually, the use of force was not commensurate with the amount, or rather the punishment that, because if they had taken 200 cattle, maybe you would take back 200 cattle, maybe, just to quieten a number of individuals, take them to prison. But they chose to use excessive force, and for which we have now an area called Chemagel in Sotik, which means a place where the skulls were put out to dry in the sun, Chemagel. Those of you who understand the Kalenjin language, means the teeth, of those skulls were standing out in the sun for so long. 1,850 individuals put out there and buried, and all of this was airbrushed out of history. You don't know about it because you are not meant to know about it. The British just simply plucked this out of the curriculum books. The official history of the colonial rule in Kenya does not mention it, but of course, researchers have gone out there and have plucked out papers that implicitly implicate the British for using excessive force against an underarmed community and people who were engaging in a cultural practice. Cattle raiding was a cultural practice, not even an economic practice, because they were used to doing this to bring their boys to come of age. It was a coming of age exercise. It had nothing to do with theft. And I'll talk about this very quickly with your indulgence, Judge Peter. The Indian Penal Code was introduced to Kenya in 1895. In fact, on the 6th of July, 1895, the Indian Penal Code was formally introduced in Kenya. Now, a lot of these people who were arrested for small, cultural activities that British did not understand that were cultural activities were judged under the Indian Penal Code and given 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years. It was such harsh treatment. And so we have so many individuals who were treated badly by the promulgation of a law that was done for another country, was not meant for us, and then we suffered the consequences of that. Now, why do we talk about this? We talk about this because to this day, the legacy endures. The lands around Sotik were taken by the British there about that time, and to this day, they still hold that land. So colonialism never ended among the Kipsigis. It continues to this day. And you dare touch or step into their land, and you will be prosecuted under vestiges of the same Indian Penal Code that was brought to us in 1895. So it's time, like Honorable Claudia has said, get your knee off our neck. We're tired. It's time. We can't breathe. The Kipsigis people can't breathe. The Nandi people can't breathe. Because just about that time, the same Maxim gun that was used by Pope Hennessy was used to kill Koitalel just about 3 months after the Sotik massacre. Then we have the Nandi massacre that happened from October 19th, 1905. And Governor Sang, I'm sure will speak about this. If we go back into these times, the same lands that they hold, over 200,000 acres among the Kipsigis, over 150,000 acres among the Nandi, is still collectively held by the British, multinationals, one way or another. And over the years, we have had a conspiracy of silence. Not so many people are talking about this. We do not have enough people talking about this. And I'm glad, Honorable Claudia, this will be your baby. And take it up for us. Help remove this knee that is on our neck. Thank you very much, Judge Peter.
What should be the possibility, what is the possibility of this entering into the Kenyan national curriculum and into the British national curriculum? Because as I'm absolutely sure Claudia will bear this out, and Connie as well, there's no mention in any British national curriculum of any massacre. The Amritsar massacre is the only one you might just hear about in 1923 in India, but absolutely nothing, complete and utter silence, both about Mau Mau, but particularly about the Sotik massacre.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful question. We have to talk about these things, and we talk about these things by writing to the relevant education secretaries in the United Kingdom, here in Kenya, to include these aspects of forgotten histories into our national curriculum. Our children don't know this. I know our parents were not even told about this. It's our grandparents who experienced these things firsthand and passed it down to us through oral history. But it's time that we formalize this and put it as part of our national curriculum. Of course, it would be foolhardy to say just that the Sotik massacre was the only massacre that happened in this time. There was a Sotik massacre. There was also the Nandi massacre. There was the Kisii massacre a little bit, but the one that stands out the most with the highest number of casualties is the Sotik massacre. And for a community that had very little ammunition, what was a gun in front of, what was a bow and arrow in front of a Maxim gun of all things, and 2 Maxim guns, 14,000 rounds of ammunition were used. And you can be sure that when this was happening, the Kipsigis themselves were wondering why this was happening. They didn't even know why it was happening, because they had done the cattle raids for so many years. It was really nothing wrong with that. The imposition of the Indian Penal Code, nobody even took them there about this, about what the law was about. They did not understand the newly imposed laws. But to them, the biggest irony was the British came, took their land, made them work on that land, and while they stole their land, nobody was prosecuting them for theft of land, but they were being prosecuted for theft of cattle. You see the irony of this thing. Why was the law being selectively applied on one community and not on another community? The British stole that land. The British stole their cattle, raped their women, took them to prison for absolutely nothing, killed their menfolk and children, and a lot of the women that were widowed from the Sotik massacre were banished into prostitution, because again, when the taxes were introduced, remember, so many of them now had to go and look for employment and a way of making money. And so a lot of those widows who could not be inherited by others were forced into prostitution, and they brought back a disease that was never known by the Africans. We didn't know about syphilis. And in 1906 or 7 or 8, there was no cure for syphilis. It was a terminal illness. They came, they spread it in the highlands. Hundreds more, thousands more Kipsigis people died as a result of that Sotik massacre, the indirect effects of all these things. So we're saying that it not just happened once, there was a chain, it set in motion a chain of events that culminated in the in a very severe social disruption of the Kipsigis people. That continues to this very day.
Okay.
I have worked.
I'm going to have to cut you there because I've got to go to other panelists, but thank you very much for that, and we'll do that. Can I then go to Dr. Coney Sozi in London as well? I know that your PhD was on Kenyan land rights. And reflecting upon the history that Godfrey has alluded to, and also Professor Ciacconi, and the international perspective that Member of Parliament Claudia has brought, how is that borne out in the land rights in Kenya that you have analysed and studied?
Thank you very much, Peter, and Mheshimiwa, thank you very much. What I saw in my PhD is that there was a lot of theft of land. In fact, if you look at the system that we had, the Kenyans had before Kenya became a protectorate and Kenya became a colony. So there was a 15-year period between, no, 25-year period between Kenya becoming a protectorate in 1895 and Kenya becoming a colony in 1920. And during that time, what you saw was the imposition of laws by the British, which the effect of which was to strip off the native communities of their land. And so you saw the introduction of legislation such as the Crown Lands Ordinance of 1902 and that of 1915, which converted land which had been previously owned by communities, native communities, to Crown land. Which is another word for government land. And so, for example, in the Rift Valley, what you would have seen is land owned by communities was taken from them, stolen by them, apportioned to white settlers, who then created large farms, ranches, plantations, and commercial estates, using Kenyans for labor, as has just been said. And then when Kenya became a colony in 1920, that gave the British colonial administration even more, strength to continue with their illegal, we say, activities. You saw the imposition of additional laws which entrenched their hold on Kenya as a territory. There was therefore the introduction of private and public law tenures, and these were constructed with a view to ensuring that the colonial government controlled land completely, and that took land from Kenyan native communities. And all this was very alien to the communities. And as has been said, communities up until that point of colonialism owned community land. They just had a community understanding of and patterns and institutions. That's all they knew. So when all this was introduced, it was all very alien to them. But the result of it was even more negative, in that, of course, it led to the disinheritance of communities of their land. It increased inequitable access to land. It diminished the communal understanding of land tenure. It led to a lot of land tenure insecurity. And unless you had documentary evidence that you owned land, and of course, up until, private land was introduced, we weren't walking around with title deeds. So we didn't even have that. So, but that was how the economy of land became. You had to produce title deeds to show that you owned land. And of course, communities didn't have title deeds. So that was all, their land rights were denied. And for the white colonial population, of course, this worked in their advantage. They then became owners of very, very fertile land. And the unfortunate situation is when Kenya became independent in 1963, land laws were not immediately reversed. We saw the perpetuation of those unfortunate breaches in the independent period. So, the Constitution of 2010 is a very, very pivotal piece of well, it's constitutional law. And what that says is land in Kenya has three categories. It is private land, it is public land, and it is also community land. So the community land provisions are those that will hopefully address some of the violations that previously that happened in the colonial period. But unfortunately, when one looks at the definition of the community land under the Constitution, it's not easy to fit into those categories. And in fact, those communities who might identify as communities under that and under Article 63 of the Constitution are going to be those small communities in the Rift Valley, like the Ogiek, or the smaller communities who don't necessarily have political agency. And those are the communities whose way of land just relationship with land is not necessarily shared with the bigger society. So when people are hunter-gatherers or pastoralists, the majority of Kenyans might not, appreciate that is how those people want to remain, and so they might not have a lot of societal support. But the other thing that the Constitution does do is it introduces, of course, the National Land Commission, which has been spoken about briefly this afternoon, and that commission has the power to investigate historical injustices, which started in 1895. So, communities have that avenue to at least address whatever violations they might have encountered. The other thing that the Constitution does is it says to non-citizens that you can no longer have land indefinitely or infinitely. What we're going to do is reduce your leaseholds or your land tenure leases to leaseholds from freeholds, and it's going to be for a maximum of 99 years, and I think previously it was 999 years. So the Constitution goes some way to addressing some of the human rights violations or land-related violations that were introduced in the colonial period.
Thank you. Thank you for that excellent participation, and we'll come back to each panelist as well after the last presentation. Can I ask now Kimatai Bosek, who's one of the most charming and effective lawyers of the High Court of Kenya, and has been leading the legal struggle to obtain redress. Firstly, just to give a quick summary about what legal action has been taken to date and what the current situation is. Have these multinationals rolled over and died, or are they still fighting their corner and seeking to maintain their position?
Thank you very much, Judge Peter. Thank you, and good afternoon, Your Excellency, Professor Chipkoñ, Honorable Mheshimiwa Claudia in the UK. Very delighted to be listening to your very articulate presentation today. Thank you, Connie, Dr. Connie, Dr. Sang, and all the panelists. Thanks, Peter, for this opportunity that you've given unto me. And starting from where probably Connie said, that the participation of British government in land alienation in Kenya could be divided into two. There is the Protectorate Era from 1895 all the way to 1920, whereby in international law, a country exercising protectorate is not supposed to interfere with domestic or internal affairs. So what the British government did, and this was done at the Buckingham Palace, I hope I've pronounced the word correctly, was to declare land in Kericho that was owned by the Kipsigis and the Talai to be crown land, which in itself is illegal under international law, and it was done by the Crown of England. And this was done despite the fact that there was a law in England, the so-called British Foreign Settlement Act of 1887, that actually mandated the Crown to appoint officials and to establish institutions and to ensure that there was, and I'm referring to Section 2, that there was good governance, good order, and equality between the British settlers and the native communities, as they so call them. But what we see is opposite of that. The British came in and favored, of course, their settlers, so that in 1920, all land in Kericho had been taken away and it had become crown land. But what the people had not realized is that they were occupying land which was their land, but which the crown in England was also claiming to be its land. From 1919, even before we became a colony, British again, having taken 90,000 acres from Londiani, from the Kipsigis, and lumping them into the so-called native reserves. And as His Excellency said, native reserves and the Bantustans in South Africa are no different. And I've always advocated this view that the Boers in South Africa appears to have been learning from the best. The British are the ones who started the apartheid system, and the South African Boers perfected it. How do you distinguish between the so-called African native reserves and the European settler reserves, which was established immediately after the Catalan Commissions of 1934? Catalan Commission of 1934 came into place when a lot of Kipsigis land had been taken away. In total, 1 million acres of Kipsigis land was taken. That Catalan Commission was discussed by the cabinet in the UK, because when you read the report of 1934, that is the Kenya land report, which was headed by the former Chief Justice of Tanganyika, and who was also in Rhodesia one time as the Chief Justice, Lord Maurice Carter, was discussed by the cabinet. One of the good recommendations, because there were some recommendations that were racist undertones, but one of the good recommendations which the British should have taken up and addressed was that the commission recommended that the African people who had lost land be compensated. In total, the African communities in Kenya that lost land were probably 7 or so, and the total acreage was 6,750,000. The Kipsigis lost 1 million, meaning that the Kipsigis are the ones who suffered the most. And when I say this, fathomed by an British colonial administrator by the name of A.A. Swan, who was the Kericho District Commissioner, who in 1946 wrote that certainly no any other community in Kenya has lost as much land as the unfortunate Kipsigis man. And you cannot isolate the story of the Kipsigis from that of the Talai. The Talai were removed forcefully to a place called Kwasi in 1934. And at that time, the British were aware that Kwasi was a region with a lot of sesefly, because there was a report which Godfrey showed me of 1925 by the British House of Commons, compiled or headed by a parliamentarian by the name of Al Gore. The Al Gore report actually found that sesefly had infested Kwasi. And you ask yourself, did the British want these Talai people to die? And I want to say, with a lot of respect to the British people, that that was a form of genocide. How do you explain taking a whole community of people, criminalizing them? People become criminals because they have committed a criminal act. But I've never seen a situation, or it has never happened in anywhere in history, where somebody is born a prisoner or a criminal, where somebody by virtue of his birth is actually a criminal. It reminds us of the singing of Lucky Dube, Born to Serve. British took them to Kwasi in 1934, and every year we know very well that governments in the world under international law, census is done every 10 years, and the purpose of census is so that government can provide infrastructure and other form of social services to the people. But for Talai, census was done every year, not to provide for hospitals, not to provide anything. There are a number of Talais who today lives with deformities, disabilities, others became blind, many died. As a matter of fact, in the first 3 years, there was 100% abortion of the Talai women. Sometimes when the British pretend that they are the custodians of civilization, I ask myself a lot of questions. I ask myself, why did they have to do all these things to people in a land that was their own, that was given by the Almighty God? Why didn't they come and probably buy this land? That is what they did in New Zealand when they met with the Waitangi people. What was so different? Do you want to say that in 1830, the British had become developed or civilized? Then in 1885, when they came to Africa, they became savages? I mean, it doesn't add up. And then for the, I know I don't have a lot of time, Peter. For the British multinationals, many Kenyans are fighting against what is called land grabbing. Very few Kenyans do not know that the British multinationals who have invested in tea production in Kericho or in Kipsigis land, together with Bomet, of course, are actually the pioneer land grabbers in Kenya. The so-called English tea, somebody recently, I was reading an article that the people who were former slaves saying that they are the sugar in the English tea. But for the Kipsigis, we are actually the tea in the so-called English tea. That is our tea. But we cannot say much about it. You go to Kericho and Bomet and you see the kind of poverty that people are going through, and you ask yourself a lot of questions. The vicious circle of poverty, which has to be broken, and we have to see a situation where people must benefit from their resources. We've gone to Geneva, as His Excellency the Governor has stated, and we are waiting for the Special Rapporteur to invite us so that we can table more evidence. Of course, we have given him a lot of evidence. And when the National Land Commission of Kenya gave a very wonderful recommendation, which, by the way, they were not telling the British multinationals to leave the country. They were telling them that it's time you don't use the 1915 land ordinance, which my friend Connie, Dr. Connie stated. They want to use the Crown Land Ordinance of 1915 to be paying rates. They were telling them pay rates in accordance with the prevailing circumstances at commercial value. They were telling them you could continue to own these titles for another 99 years from 2010, which, by the way, would have been a good bargain for them. But they are not seeing it that way. These are people who even disdain the county government. They don't see it as a government. They see it as a very unnecessary irritant and a nuisance. These are people who want to live in the past. They don't recognize that there's a new constitution. They have taken us to court, and in their judicial review, of course, to get the decision of the National Land Commission quashed. They are not even able to produce the copies of the title deeds because they have problems with those copies of the title deeds. Connie, you might not have realized that those title deeds are now becoming a great embarrassment to the multinationals in Kericho, operating in Kericho and Bomet, because those titles were given by the Crown of England. This land no longer belongs to the Crown, of course. The national government of Kenya agrees with the National Land Commission that the new owners ought to be the people of Kericho and Bomet through their respective county governments, who are supposed to be the trustees on behalf of the people. But it is a real problem for the multinationals to produce those kind of documents. Whereas in the past, Connie, they were very happy to claim that this is my title deed, I've been given by the government, but today those papers are really very embarrassing to them. And they have not changed the way they are doing their operation. They have not even changed their lawyers. The law firms that they were using or that was being used to perpetuate all these injustices is the same lawyer that has...
Can I just interrupt you there?
Sure,
Because we're running out of time. I did promise to get back to people.
Sure.
Can I thank you for that presentation?
Okay, thank you.
You will see there as well that we have a team of lawyers, not just in Kenya, but in the United Kingdom, that are working on this, the concerted effort. Governor, can I come back to you and just ask, taking all the issues that have been raised, I looked very quickly on the Unilever website. It says nothing about historical injustice. I think you've written to the Unilever and others and have asked for title deeds. Have you had any? Have you had any or heard of any donations by Unilever, James Finley Tea, or George Williamson to schools or hospitals or roads or amenities or scholarships for young people? As a governor of your people, what has been the effect of the give back, if any, from these multinationals?
Thank you very much, Judge Peter. I'm very glad I'm talking to the world, with one of our participants being a representative elected by the people of the United Kingdom. I want to say here, without fear of contradiction, that the British multinationals in Kericho have never built a single hospital for the community, not a single kilometer of road. What they do is tokenism of some little water tanks here, some little bridges here and there. And you know, they earn a lot of money, which, and I want to say again, they are involved in price fixing. They are influencing prices at the tea auction of the small-scale tea farmers. We'll get to that later. Having gone through National Land Commission, we had one recommendation that these multinational companies must be involved in CSR. They have not been giving scholarships to school kids, and they are getting a lot of money from the community. So, Jai Peter, the responsibility that they have is enormous, and they really need to do something about that. And finally, in the recommendation of the National Land Commission, it is said very clearly, in 1964, it was wrong to have the land remaining in the hands of the British multinational companies after independence. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just bring in Claudia again? And one of the questions that came from one of the participants was what the diaspora can do, the political diaspora in particular, both in the United Kingdom and possibly the United States, to bring pressure on these multinationals to either leave or to share their vast profits that they make with the people who do all the hard work. And what are some of the ideas that you have and colleagues in the United Kingdom may have to combat these multinationals?
Well, of course, it's an atrocity that has to be addressed. I think we in the UK, we have to put. I think I'm back in operation now. Can you? Hopefully, you can hear me and see me now. Well, of course, I mean, this is an atrocity. There's nothing good, of course, that's come out of colonization, colonialism in Kenya. We in the UK must seek to right the wrong that has been done. It is appalling. The Britain cannot wash its hands of this. It is absolutely involved, and therefore it must act. We in Parliament must enable and put pressure on the UK government to indeed do a number of things. One, I've already talked about the debt cancellation. Two, I think the teaching the truthful education about what happened in Kenya and with the Sotek people needs to be addressed. And actually that needs to be addressed in Kenya too, in terms of addressing that agenda, because we need to ensure that future generations understand this legacy and the impact of this legacy. I think we've got to, obviously the world is focused on coronavirus right now, which is why we need to call for immediate short-term measures that address the whole issue of debt in the first place. Then the issue of land, of course, we must join with those movements across Kenya and across the world that will put pressure, because in a sense change doesn't happen without the joining up together of people. And I think we need to join, those of us who are progressive in the UK need to join the forces of change, if you like, the movements of change across Africa and across the world, and bring others with us in that regard. And I think that obviously we need a socialist government in order to kind of be at the table at an international level. So we're relying on a government that we have to push very hard, even to challenge the Trumps of this world. So I'm not hopeful of the kind of change that we might want to see in terms of the radical transformation that is necessary, and an international agenda that does indeed seek to understand the responsibility that Britain has and the role that it has played, and the work that it needs to do to repair the past which it was complicit in. And that's a bit, you know, that's a pressure that we have to put on this government, and an honest discussion. We need to understand, of course, that movements like Black Lives Matter that's emanated out of America are movements that we need to join together with, and work with those movements to address some of the injustices that we are seeing to this day with multinationals. But Britain says, and it prides itself in being multilateral in its operation, and global in its thinking, and internationalist in its approach. Well, we on the left have to remind Britain of its responsibility as in terms of its international agenda, because right now we're talking about a government that has already removed its debt, its responsibilities around aid, in terms of the removal of a department that looks at international development. I sit on a body in Parliament that looks at foreign affairs. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and it's expected that the whole aspect of international development, a department that has already been removed by our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of the UK, is expected that this will now be part of the foreign affairs agenda. Now, it's not clear how that will then materialize, and I think it makes it much more difficult to address the international development and responsibilities that the UK should be putting its mind to. But I'm ever so hopeful that the movement that we have in terms of Black Lives Matter, and movements across the world resulting out of this coronavirus, will mean that we cannot let this go. We must wake up to change, and therefore we must begin to address the change that is necessary with the progressives in Kenya around this issue. And we must put international pressure, and Britain must play its part. And we, as progressives on the left in the UK, must enable Britain to play its part. And we must have more international conversations like this in order to address the injustices that have been perpetrated, not just yesterday, but continue today, and so that we right the wrongs that have taken place. I just want to say, just end by saying this, that, you know, this is a time for change, and in a sense, we can no longer accept what we cannot change. We need to obviously change the things that we cannot accept, and that is what that is a memory that I have from the works of Angela Davis when she says, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I want to change the things I can no longer accept." And with that in mind, I think that is where we have to go as not just as Kenya, but we have to go internationally, and we have to go in the UK and show solidarity around these issues that require change. So solidarity, I want to bring that certainly, and hopefully with a socialist agenda moving forward, hopefully with a socialist government in the future, the UK can play its full part in righting those wrongs.
Thank you. We're going to have to move to the second part of the debate and to the second panel. We have overrun somewhat, but I think it's been very valuable to do just that. Can I apologise to those panelists that I didn't get back to a second time? It simply is because there is a time constraint. Can I thank Claudia Webb very much for her excellent presentation. I know there's an invitation to you on its way from the Governor of Kericho, if I'm not out of turn.
And welcome, Claudia, to God's own bathroom, that is Kericho. This is the county which was declared by the British as unoccupied and wasteland. Yet behind the scenes in London, they were saying it is the best watered land, most suitable for raising a European child. Can you imagine the contradiction? And what happened after World War I? They gave it to BIDOC, British disabled officers. And yet we had Africans who fought in the war, and they were never given anything.
They were chased away.
You know, so finally we are ready to go all the way, and and I want to thank our friends for standing with us. So welcome to Kericho. When you take tea, you enjoy a lot of polyphenols in the tea, and you live 100 years more. Thank you.
Thank you. And on those words, with that invitation going across the airwaves, absolutely now it's public, so everybody hears it. You'll have to come to Kenya. Dr. Kony Susie, your birthplace, you have to come back. But when you're in the UK, I'm sure you will carry the torch for this, in a sense, what is a continuation of the liberation struggle for Kenyans. Godfrey, a fantastic presentation. And it is something that the British are supposed to love history. What they don't love is their own bad history. And certainly the British High Commissioner spoke about good and bad things in the relationship. I've not been able to find much good, but I've certainly been able to find a whole lot of things which are bad. And last but not least, Kimutai Bose, who is leading the legal fight, both not only here in Kenya, but instructing Rodney Dixon QC before the United Nations Special Rapporteur, and if necessary, taking the matter to the East African Court. But we will, to collectively not just let this matter go.
The European Court of Human Rights.
And the European Court of Human Rights. So, in a sense, we will leave no stone unturned. Can I thank the current panelists for their excellent contribution? This is not the first, it's not certainly the last webinar, there will be others. But let me then move to the other panel, which is going to pick up from some of the issues and delve into more detail about matters that we haven't completely touched on as yet. We are due to hear now, one of the panelists is Henry Belsoy. Henry is a Kericho County tea consultant and who will give a detailed explanation of the tea price fixing that has been spoken of already. We also hope to be joined by Rodney Dixon QC, the eminent human rights barrister, who has been responsible for lodging the report with the United Nations, commissioned by His Excellency the Governor. We're also going to be joined by Logan Hambrick, a US attorney and international human rights expert, who will address issues about the workers' exploitation that I, in fact, saw firsthand in Kericho and Bomet County. And you may have seen some of the images posted on the screen. But if you compare the vast profits the multinationals make with the conditions the workers live in and the paltry amount that they are paid, it is an absolute and international disgrace of exploitation. And anybody drinking any tea anywhere in the world ought to know that it's being done at a huge price, and that is the price which is landing on the backs of the workers in Kericho and Bomet counties. We also have a young lawyer who I had the pleasure of meeting some weeks ago, and we interviewed a number of people like Laikipia Maasai. Mr. Musa Nadira went with me and interviewed a number of very elderly but extremely spirited Maasai elders in Laikipia County, and that may well be the subject of a subject that we touch on in some regard, but we will go into in more detail in a coming webinar as well. So can I ask, because the issue that has been raised initially by the governor was of the exploitation of workers, and so you mentioned in passing that there had been no contribution from the multinationals in roads, hospitals, schools, or anything else. And therefore, what really is the experience? I think there's a main road coming out of Kericho. On the one hand, you have huge plantations of multinationals. On the other, you have what, generally speaking, compared to the wealth on the other side of the road, is a huge gulf between the businesses, small holdings, and then the properties of the local inhabitants. What is the degree of exploitation as a governor that you see?
Thank you very much, Peter. This is historical. When you apply Kericho to the west, you will see a Berlin Wall in the name of a road, where to the left, there is a lot of prosperity. This is where we have thousands and thousands of multinational tea plantations, and this is where the wealth of the people has been stolen, and this is something that was covered in the first presentation. What I can say is that the multinational companies did not buy the land from the people. They came and took it forcefully. People's houses were burned. They destroyed everything. Everybody was chased to be squatters in their own land. Then when the multinational companies were set up, they perpetuated exploitation of the people. In fact, the plantations were put up by people for free. People were being handed to little areas where they would be forced to fell trees. As soon as it was done, they would be moved to another area until the area was cleared for free. And when the multinationals were set up, the local community is not even given a chance to work there. In fact, what the people are doing there is making a living on very, very, very difficult areas on the left side of the plantation. Now, you find that these people are not providing any services to the people. There is no CSR. They've never built any hospitals. They've never built any roads. And the amount of money which is coming out of Kericho is a lot of money. And that is why in 2013, people brought a petition that we need to do something about it. And that is why we decided to do something about it. And this is where now we have this complaint to the United Nations. The multinational companies lately have just been involved in tokenism, where they do some little water projects here and there as a way of financing the people, because they know that the recommendations of the National Land Commission need to be implemented. So I want to say here that as a government, we are ready to go all the way to make sure that the recommendations of the Land Commission are implemented. Some of the recommendations include the fact that the land belongs to the people, the land needs to be resurveyed so that we know the exact acreage, because these people are declared and they are not even willing to show the title deed. So we have a timeline within which to complete this, which should be the next 1.5 years before 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things that has been raised already, and I think it leads directly into the workers' conditions, is the issue of tea price fixing. I'm not an economist, I'm not a tea consultant, but we have somebody who really is. And therefore, can I ask you, Henry, to give that summary, just to break it down and say how these multinationals have held this power and wealth, not only through the land, but through the manipulation, as you see it, of the market.
Right, thank you very much, Judge Peter. My name is Henry Belsoy. I work in the private sector in Kenya and consulting for the county government of Kericho. Well, as has been earlier alluded, the colonial enterprise is alive and well in Kericho and Bomet County, represented by at least 5 imperial Victorian era tea multinational companies. Those are Unilever, James Finlay, George Williamson, Sotik Tea Company Limited, Sotik Highlands. There is another Samir Group, which its case is slightly different. So tea is one of the oldest forms of international business, having been internationalized by the British businessmen over 400 years ago. It's built on unethical business practices, which manifest currently in terms of price fixing, transfer pricing, and mispricing. For example, it is believed that the prices of tea are fixed in the auction in Mombasa by collusion between the multinationals and the supplier of small-scale holder tea. That is KTDA. So there's been a perennial...
Sorry, KTDA,
KTDA, Kenya Tea Development Agency, which markets the small-scale farmers' tea on their behalf. They don't do... currently, the Cabinet Secretary of Agriculture is involved in trying to reform the tea sector because of the outcry of the small-scale farmer tea prices. There has been a perennial low price of tea, despite tea being the leading export of this country, despite Kenya being the leading exporter of tea in the world. 700,000 small-scale farmers are suffering, basically into modern-day slavery, by reasons caused by the multinationals who do not sell their tea through the auction, but engage in private negotiations and use related party companies to negotiate the tea. So ex-factory tea prices in Kenya are close to $3, but we hear that in the UK you'll find a kilo of tea going for $20. So there's a whole difference of about $17. If you multiply that in terms by the production of Kenyan tea, 400 million kilos, you find that is a loss of over 680 billion Kenyan shillings, almost 7 times more than the value of tea in this country. Tea in this country is valued at 100 billion shillings annually. But the losses that the country is facing is unbelievable. So you have companies like all of these imperial era companies that I've mentioned, all of them continue to declare losses in this country every year. And they continue to, some of them continue to collude buying tea from the tea auction through proxy companies. For example, it is believed that Unilever buys tea at the auction through another related party, Cargill International. Collects all this tea at a low price and goes and sells it at a higher price in the UK. So I'd like to mention also that all these representative multinational tea companies in Kenya are all ghost companies. They are all represented by, they are all representatives of parent companies in the UK who siphon revenue from the country in the transfer pricing mechanism. So they have puppet directors in this country, and they are continuing to underdevelop the counties and this country by siphoning revenue to their parent companies. So it's unfortunate that this colonial enterprise is still continuing to this very day in the country, and we hope that something can be done now to challenge it. We have a report from the rapporteur from the United Nations on extreme poverty and human rights, which they claim that poverty is a political decision. So we hope that the political leadership of this country can be able to take decisive action to be able to end this poverty in this country and for our people. So according to the tea business, in reality, is a lucrative business. In fact, according to Maasai Professional Services, which is funded by the likes of Unilever in their research, it is believed that 25,000 cups of tea are drunk every second. This in total leads to about 2.16 billion cups of tea a day. If you assume the price of tea, the price of a cup of tea is about $0.50, you're talking about revenue to the tune of $432 million a day. That is a colossal amount of money in the tea value chain, which our farmers have never witnessed. They're languishing in conditions of modern-day slavery and poor prices for their very hard work. So we believe that the country is in the right direction now, spearheaded by the efforts of the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, Mr. Peter Munya, with targeting reforms in the tea sector. We believe that the county also should take efforts. These imperial era multinational companies really need to be audited because they have continued with their colonial enterprise up to modern day. So we believe that efforts should be made to sort this problem. I would like to I'd like to read a quote by the Prime Minister of Britain in the recent UK-Africa Summit early this year. He says, and I quote, "As a result of the $53 million investment in Mombasa, half of the tea drunk in the UK comes from Kenya." Think about that. Britain without a nice cup of tea would be barely worth thinking about. We have literally kept sustained, kept sane, and rational throughout the day by infusions from Kenya's supply tea, even if it doesn't originate from Kenya. It comes from Kenya. That's what I mean. But be careful about that. End of quote. These multinationals are causing a lot of confusion in the supply chain, because you find that these multinationals are busy shift papers. For example, Unilever sells its tea to its subsidiary, Unilever Pacific Private Limited. And so do all the other multinationals in Kericho and Bomet. Right, now, The Pacific region includes probably China and India, who produce more tea than Kenya itself. But you find that even the tea that is sold to these related parties, maybe it's not even the tea that goes there, maybe papers in terms of logistics. But the tea lands in other destinations like London at 3, 4, 5 times the price of the tea here. So, yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you because we have 2 other panelists join us. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure I get everybody in. Apologies for that. Yeah. But there is a continuity about this exploitation, which we will develop in written papers. We were picking up, I think, where we've been joined, we have by Rodney Dixon QC. Can I give you a very warm welcome? Just because of the way in which the discussion is going, can I ask next, though, Logan Hambrick, just to give a very quick, around about 3 or 4 minutes, summary of the exploitation of workers that has been touched upon His Excellency the Governor, and obviously is a direct consequence of the tea price fixing that Henry has so eloquently talked about. Logan, welcome.
Thank you, Judge Peter. Thank you, Your Excellency, and to all the other panelists. It's a pleasure to be here. I started my career actually working in Sierra Leone and Liberia in a post-conflict situation there, which became known worldwide as the Blood Diamonds conflict, and for good reason. There were, for the reasons seen in Leonardo DiCaprio's movie by the same name, there were really horrific atrocities associated with the trade of diamonds in Sierra Leone and Liberia. When we come to the situation now in Kenya and we want to talk of blood tea or something similar, of course, we're not dealing with a situation of forced labor at gunpoint from armed militias. But what we are dealing with is tea picking, which is taking place in an exploitative global trade environment. And as we talk about historical injustices and land alienation and things that have happened in the past, we can't ignore the reality of what is taking place in the tea plantations as we speak. You know, there's this image of British people taking high tea, you know, and it conjures up fine china and images of fancy snacks and an aristocratic leisurely afternoon activity. But there's a saying in Kenya, qua ground vitu ni different. You know, things on the ground are not as they appear elsewhere. Things on the ground are different. For what goes into your 3 or 4 pound or euro or dollar cup of chai is the equivalent of hours of backbreaking work, often by single moms, often by very vulnerable people who don't have many choices in terms of what is their work environment, what kinds of work are they able to do. Workers are hired by these multinationals and they're expected to meet certain daily targets. It's not like you get a routine paycheck at the end of the month, but you're told you have to pick a certain number of kilograms per day. You're paid per kilogram. If you don't reach the target, not only do you not get paid as much, you can be given a show cause letter by the employer, which of course leads to disciplinary proceedings, can lead to you being terminated as an employee. The day in the life of a tea picker starts very early. We're talking a 6 a.m. Arrival almost before the sun is up. You can go until 4 and 5 in the afternoon before you have picked your quota or you've picked all that is expected of you to do. And the irony of it all is that you don't even get a tea break in the middle of it. Yet when you go to the websites of the multinationals, if you look at Unilever, for example, and you see all of their human rights lingo, they talk about having a sustainable living plan. They talk about having a corporate social responsibility that they adhere to. They list their achievements in terms of what are they doing for workers on the ground. But again, what they say and what you see are often very different. Unilever houses almost 50,000 people in company housing, but I think many of these structures are truly from a colonial era and haven't been renovated, haven't been fixed up. The people living there share outhouses. There's very low rates of electricity. There was a plan for solar lighting and solar electricity coming. And even that is not functioning, despite, again, it being touted as a success on the Unilever website. The multinationals talk about running schools and having these things, but of course, these are government schools, public schools, which just happen to be inside the tea plantations. And as the governor pointed out, there's very little actual input by the multinationals to pay teachers, to improve the facilities, to keep the schools running. Yet we know that these multinationals, of course, benefit from these different business and human rights type certifications. Unilever has a Rainforest Alliance certificate. It uses a fair trade logo. And ostensibly, these confer a commercial benefit to these companies. You know, consumers are now educated, at least in terms of wanting to buy products that have a good history, that have a good source. You know, you want to be associated with a company which is doing the right thing. And so, unfortunately, what we find is that in the process of getting certified, it's the companies themselves that are sending out the information to the certification authorities. And of course, we would all put forth a good report. You know, I would say, yes, I'm doing a wonderful job. I deserve this award. I deserve this certification. And what it's time for is really for us to send shadow reports, you know, is to go to the ground and to speak to the tea workers, see the conditions, take photos, send a shadow report to Rainforest Alliance, to the Fair Trade Commissions, so that if they're conferring this certification, they know really what is taking place. I also, yes.
Just interrupt you because I've got to get with two other panelists. But I just saw a tweet from Right Honourable Claudia Webb suggesting that there should be a Black Lives Matter demonstration outside Unilever at some point, both possibly in London and in Kenya, to bring the issue home. Can I then turn to the two other panelists, not because I wish to cut what is happening, because I think there's further work to be done exactly as you suggested. But can I turn now to Rodney Dixon QC? Thank you very much for joining us. And I know you have been the person who helped drafted the report of the United Nations and are playing a pivotal role as a human rights expert barrister from the UK. And I remember at my pupillage, probably goes back further than yours, where tea was drunk compulsory at 4 o'clock every day, but I didn't quite know the history behind it. Welcome, Rodney Dixon.
Peter, I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much. His Excellency, the Governor of Kericho County, very good to see everyone. And it's a great opportunity to update you briefly on what is happening with our claim on behalf of the peoples of Kericho and Bonet counties for the colonial injustices that have been perpetrated against them. Our claim relates both to historic land exploitation and abuses, as well as to the human rights violations that were committed to take away the land and that have continued thereafter. I am at the moment giving my talk from The Hague, which is, as you know, the international capital of justice in the world. It's, I think, only fitting that we look at how we can address these historical abuses as a form of justice for all of the victims, to draw a line under it and to obtain appropriate compensation for the future. There is no court case in our claim, and there is a reason for that. It is one primarily relating to the fact that if we were to get embroiled in years and years of litigation, we are most unlikely to get a favorable outcome. We certainly have the ability to launch legal cases in court, and we will do that if it is necessary, if there's no resolution of the matter. But what we have done is we have embarked upon the road of seeking to mediate and negotiate and reach a settlement of this matter so that it is a constructive outcome for all parties. It's not a question of us against them. Our approach, which is certainly the right one, is to find a settlement that is going to serve everyone's interests. We can take the step of litigation if it is necessary, but we are in the first phase and we are very hopeful that that will succeed. The way we are going about it, in summary, is to approach the British government to engage with us. So far, that has produced no results. And that's why we have taken it to the next level of going to the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion of truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence. This is a special post that was set up by the UN in 2011 to address precisely these kinds of past injustices, to ensure that if governments don't take up the matter on their own, which is the case here, the British government has not taken the initiative, then the UN must step in to facilitate the process. We have therefore filed our claim and all the supporting evidence with the Special Rapporteur. This matter is being considered by him at the moment. They have indicated that they are going through our material and that they will look to meet with the parties very soon. We have requested in our complaint that the Special Rapporteur should travel to Kenya to see the situation firsthand and to investigate. The primary aim will be to get the UK government to investigate, but the UN can facilitate that. They can provide their technical assistance and expertise and encourage the parties to enter into a constructive process so that the matter can be resolved. This has happened in many other situations, including in Northern Ireland, in Sri Lanka, in Spain recently in relation to the Spanish Civil War. The Special Rapporteur has become involved in conducting site visits and facilitating the parties get together to resolve the situation. In Spain, for example, it led to the recommendation of forming a truth commission. So there are recommendations that can be put in place, even though the acts took place a long time ago. There's precedent for this, and we are urging the British government to engage in that process once it now commences. This is to be a process in which, at the end of the day, what our clients are insisting on is an acknowledgement of the past injustices in relation to land and human rights, an apology for that conduct, so both a recognition of responsibility, state responsibility, and an apology, but for it to go beyond that as well, to look at appropriate forms of compensation and reparation. We are not here, and this has been made very clear by His Excellency the Governor on many occasions, looking for land grabs. This is not the aim of the legal campaign. It's rather to look at compensating people properly for the land that they've lost, surveying the land that is being used, and where land can be returned to people, that it should be rightfully returned to the owners of that land. Where that is not going to be possible, then there should be proper compensation and the community should be involved in the continuing use of that land. The idea is not to divide the communities further, but to unite them through a proper recognition of what has occurred previously, so that going forward, these matters don't hamper and, like a stone around one's neck, hold back the development in Kericho County. I think now is an opportune time for the UN to be acting, for the government of the United Kingdom to be responding, to ensure that the recommendations of the Land Commission are also taken into account and implemented. It comes in the context of a greater recognition, unfortunately through the death in the US, which has focused attention again on historical violence and violence that continues until today. But I think what is absolutely vital is that we go beyond simply acknowledging these matters or talking more about them. It's very hard nowadays to find anyone who doesn't say, yes, these are important matters, we need to address them. Black Lives Matter has been embraced by so many politicians who you might not have expected to say that. It's one thing to say it, it's a completely different matter to implement it. If it had been implemented years ago, we wouldn't be at the point now where it's all coming up again. So to draw a line under it finally, what needs to happen is that the claims that we're putting forward, they need to be seriously addressed. There needs to be a proper investigation into them so that there can be a result that is tangible for the victims that have been directly affected. And unless the victims turn around and say enough has been done, then insufficient action has been taken. That is the litmus test. And it's time to go beyond the rhetoric now and make sure that there is a proper remedy put in place that is long-term binding. Our claim is just one of those. There are many throughout the world and from the colonial past as well. Issues of slavery have begun to be raised and addressed again. Ours is a part of that, but an extremely important part for the people of Kericho County. And we're urging both the UN now, who is seized of this matter, to act swiftly.
Yeah. Riley, can I thank you for that very excellent summary of where the case currently stands, and we look forward in a future webinar to having an update, and particularly to having the United Nations rapporteur visit Kericho and Bonnet County, do that analysis for themselves. And certainly myself, it opened my eyes to the level of injustice and exploitation that you visibly see. Can I just therefore introduce our final speaker, guest speaker on the panel, last but by no means least, Musa Ndura. Ndura is a young lawyer from Laikipia County that I had the pleasure of meeting, and he took me on a tour. And just before he speaks, I introduce him, here's an excerpt of a very short video that I recorded when we were on our tour of some of the lands in Laikipia County.
My name is Musa. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, the human rights activist, born and raised in Laikipia. This is Borana Ranch. It's a land that ranges all the way from Timao to this area. So this land is where they keep, the white settlers keep their livestock. They also keep wildlife, and no native, or rather no locals are around to access this place. It is a place where if you access it, you'll be shot dead by the rangers. So, and there are also public roads in these ranches, and the locals are not allowed to use those public roads. They are forced to use very long routes, and there are public roads here, but they are not allowed to use them. They use them, they will be physically assaulted. They will actually even be charged in courts of law for trespass. They can also be charged with some flimsy charges like malicious damage to property for just using a public road where legally they are supposed to use.
Okay.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Musa. I just thought I'd share that with other panelists and those watching. And can I therefore just ask you to just summarize very briefly, and I know the time is pressing, just the main issues that are felt by the people of Laikipia. And I know that I met some of your relatives who were some of the descendants of people who were dispossessed.
Thank you so much, Judge Peter, Your Excellency, the Governor of Kericho, and all the other panelists. Let me say that it is a singular honor to be among the panelists today to share on the injustices that people are facing here in Laikipia. As you have seen, maybe just to say it again, I'm born and raised in Laikipia, and the injustices that are melted upon our people are things that I've grown seeing. They continue seeing them, and I hope that the start of this discussion globally will try to bring some justice. someone said that things don't happen, things are meant to happen. And I'm glad that we are now having this forum to make some things to happen, or rather to make justice happen to the people of Laikipia. Laikipia County is approximately 96 kilometers, 9,600 kilometers squared, and 40% of that land is owned and managed by foreign nationals or others who have mutated to citizens. They are foreigners, but they are now calling themselves citizens, having mutated from being foreigners to now being citizens. And as I said earlier, people are going through a lot of injustices in Laikipia. Number one, there are public roads which have been closed in those ranches. People are not allowed to use those roads, although they are public roads. Sometimes when they are given access to such roads, they put a disclaimer on the side roads that you pass it at your own risk. So it is really a very sad story to tell. Can I just say that according to the locals who can give us first-hand information, whom we met with Judge Peter, these ranchers kept expanding the land over and over again, expanding the original land they used to occupy during the colonial eras up to 10 times, 20 times, and even sometimes 100 times, displacing the locals who depend on livestock keeping for their livelihood. So they are being pushed more and more to reserves, and they are being pushed to reserves, and they can't actually now have more land to maintain their livelihood. In Kenya, there was a report that was tabled in 2013, the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission report. That report, among other things, recommended that in order to heal from historical land injustices, some of this land need to be surveyed and demarcated afresh. And it is sad to say that up to now, such land has not been demarcated and it has not been surveyed. The said foreign multinationals still own that land which they illegally expanded. And it is also sad to say that land was administered irregularly, and people were coerced to give their land to the white settlers dating back to 1920s, and they were coerced and they used undue influence to make them sign the treaty that surrendered the land actually from the original owners to the white settlers. And again, under the National Land Commission Act, Section 15, the National Land Commission is mandated to investigate all alleged irregular acquisition of land and recommend legal redress, either by its own initiative or through a complaint. But now in Laikipia, nothing has so far happened. There are some historical injustices claims that are launched in the National Land Commission, and it is sad to say that nothing has already been done to serve justice on the people of Laikipia. Most of them now are squatters in their own original land, where their forefathers were buried. a few of them can even identify the graves of their forefathers. And as we talk, they are squatters in that land. They are being threatened with eviction day in, day out. So as I conclude, I can just say that the legislative obligation of the National Land Commission to investigate in its own initiative, although a complaint, and provide redress to these people has not been done up to date. And it is an injustice that has been meted on the people of Laikipia, and it is an injustice that we hope it will be corrected after we have such forums. And as I said earlier, and I will conclude by saying that things don't happen, things are made to happen. And I hope we will make things happen this time round. And the things that we make to happen is serving justice on the people of Laikipia and the people of Kericho and Bomet and the people of Kenya at large. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Musa. And can I thank Musa and his friend Victor for showing me around Laikipia and meeting many of the people, the very elderly people, some of whom recounted being driven off their land by white settlers with guns and horses in the 1940s. One elderly gentleman was 102 years old and recounted the fact that his whole family and his people were bundled on trains and taken to Narok with their livestock and dumped with no recourse. So that is a story, an equally drastic story, an appalling story, which we will make the subject of a separate webinar, because the dynamics of what's happening in Laikipia are somewhat different, but with great similarities. Can I, before I ask the Governor to say a few closing words briefly about his vision for the future, can I thank, before I do that, all the members of the panelists? Can I apologise for not getting back to you again? Henry, thank you very much for the analysis you brought about tea price fixing. Rodney, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule for dialing in and giving a very detailed analysis of where the legal application is with the United Nations Special Rapporteur, and Logan here in Nairobi for highlighting some of the injustices suffered by workers. And I noticed from the links coming in that there is a whole issue about the huge amount of work that the Plantation Workers Union has done in Laikipia and Bomet Country, and how that is being undermined by bringing in non-unionised labour. So can I thank everybody? I see Claudia that is still watching, and certainly we would look to make a unified approach, both within the diaspora within Europe, but also including the diaspora in the United States and North America, to make sure that this message is not only impacted, but there actually is real change. And a year from now, the landscape of what we see in Kericho and Bomet and Laikipia looks a whole lot different from what it looks now. Your Excellency the Governor, can I give you the last word, since you have, in a sense, led the torch and carried the torch on this campaign?
As the elected government of the people of Kericho, I would like to say that we are determined to go as far as is possible to make sure that the people of Kipsigis and Talai get justice. We will do it through peaceful and legal means. Number two, we want to make sure that we pursue the recommendations of National Land Commission to the fullest. We will also pursue the complaint through the United Nations route, and if it fails, we are ready to go to European Court of Justice. As I end, I would like to say that we will remain resilient. These companies, multinational companies, which are British in nature, are old foxes. When they are pursued in one form, they evolve into another form. For example, when we pursued them on depressing prices at Mombasa tea auction, and we were pursuing Lipton tea, they retreated and fielded Guardian. Today, Unilever management called me and said they are selling Unilever. I am very sure they are feeling the heat. I want to tell whoever wants to buy that business that he or she is buying stolen property.
Yes.
That property should never be bought by any sane citizen of the world. Finally, I would like to invite all of you to Kericho. At some point, we will hold a peaceful demonstration at Unilever. We will put a knee at their gate and we will ask them to take off their foot off our necks. We've suffered for a long time. Thank you, our international friends. Welcome to Kericho anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Your Excellency, panelists, can I thank you very much. This is just the start, in a sense, of this part of the campaign. We will not go away and we will succeed. Thank you all very much for participating and your patience. And thank you to our host, the Lawyers Hub of Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much and all have a good evening.